Welcome to the Feedback Loop podcast from BloomAI, where in each episode we'll be speaking with industry experts and leaders in their field around the impact of AI in businesses and individuals. Today, myself and my BloomAI co-founder Jim Treharne are joined by Stephen Morris. Stephen is an author, speaker and leadership consultant working with businesses of all sizes around how to adapt in an AI world. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we've got three brilliant topics to cover today. So let's get stuck in.
Great. Let's do it.
Looking forward to it.
So, Stephen, you're obviously working with a myriad of different businesses on a regular basis, leaders of large, medium and organisations of all sizes. What are you hearing from the leaders you work with around their approach to AI and how they need to adapt?
Okay. So broadly, I'd describe it as being a little bit of discovery right now. That's the sort of central message of we just don't know what we don't know yet. In the media, in government, and so on, there's obviously a lot of conversation about AI. And we had Keir Starmer at the beginning of the year effectively saying that for government, at least, AI is going to seemingly solve everything. Just a quote, AI is the way to secure growth, to raise living standards, put money in people's pockets, create exciting new companies, and transform our public services. So that sounds like ambrosia for most people in an organisation who wouldn't want a little bit of that. But then as the rubber starts to hit the road, how you actually use AI and then what that's going... Well, I suppose stepping back, what we mean by AI in an organisation and how we might use it, there's a little bit of head scratching, I suppose, in general. So I've seen different uses already, some things, people bringing things in for data analysis, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, reporting, and then through to very minor things. I mentioned to you a little earlier before we started about a team and their first use of AI has been a competition to see if they can generate an image of their favourite meal to share, and that's a competition.
Prioritizations.
It's high level prioritisation. But then you've got other people doing very specialist things, bringing it in to do something that a team can't quite do on their own. And I'm sure we'll get into more of the detail. As a generalist place to start, I guess that's where I'll stop to say we're finding our feet and discovering just how broad this thing is, what it might mean. So that's mostly the conversation I'm having.
I think that AI to solve everything, I think is quite interesting. Certainly what we see when we're talking to customers and our partners is a directive from executive to adopt AI, a ubiquitous, you must adopt AI without any kind of real strategic thought or thought around compliance, data security, efficacy and that sort of thing. So yes, I think there is a broad concept out there, certainly with the leadership, that AI is that ubiquitous, generic, get it done, implement it without actually understanding how you can adopt and deploy AI effectively within your organisation 100%.
I was just going to say, I think that's exactly the point I made about discovery. So for some of the people, like that team creating pictures of dinner, that is their current interpretation of what AI is. And then that can lead to some confusion about how they might use it. Then you've got another team that are worried about their jobs and so on. And there's a lot of that confusion. And exactly as you say, a top-down edict to say everyone else and their dog are doing something with this, we must. But with no real definition or description of the problem or the opportunity that we're trying to seize.
I like the concept of not gamification, but we know that robust AI adoption. We know that this, aside from the leadership responsibilities, in terms of how we train our staff, we have to embed those skills in our staff, and they're not hard skills, right? We have to give them the tools, the environment, to find their own way to a certain extent. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the jagged edge of AI and AI discovery. But I quite like the fact that the competition to see who can create their dinner. If you can make it fun and engaging, I think that's a really good and interesting way of helping your staff, certainly those that don't have experience with AI, just start to get to grips with the art of the possible.
I think it's a really important phrase, the art of the possible.
Yes.
There is genuinely such a breadth and such a depth of possibility with various AI capabilities, whether we're talking about the sort of the weakest of the chatbot stuff all the way up to something much more potentially complex. And the lay person, the lay leader, as it were, who suddenly has this in their in tray as a thou must do something from the board with AI,
Yes.
we've got to explore and discover what those things are, and then use our own wisdom and an understanding of our teams, our businesses, and our climate to say, well, that might be an opportunity to play, and that might be an opportunity as well. Let's have a go.
I think that's absolutely spot on. What we see very frequently is failed AI projects.
Yeah.
And typically these are because it's been product led. There's been potentially third party training on a specific product. Maybe it might be Copilot, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
And it trains people maybe a few functions that you can do within Copilot. And that's it. That's not experimental. It's not self-discovery. It's not collaborative. And those things are absolutely essential in terms of AI adoption across your entire organisation.
Just a last point, I think, on that thing of discovery, because this is a conversation I've certainly had. One of the reasons I'm seeing things like people drawing pictures of their dinner or creating pictures of their dinner is that that's a fairly safe thing to do.
Yes.
We're not touching any of our data. We're not risking particularly anything in terms of compliance or concerns. You know, it's a very innocuous way to get started. And I'm with you. If you anything that you can do to give people a chance to experience some of this is a very positive thing. And it's probably much more likely to get you somewhere as ideas come in through your team that way than you are by trying to say from a top level, this is how we're going to use AI in our organisation. It's likely to be a combination.
A combination of approaches. One of the things that Lloyd and I do in terms of workforce enablement is a thing called a promptathon, and that is a collaborative. That's getting a team in the room.
Yeah.
We want to we want a certain outcome, and those members in that room construct prompts in order to get the achieved outcome. And again, it's that kind of gamification. It's friendly competition. It's collaborative. And again, that helps people understand how they get the best use out of AI, how they construct inputs to AI, and how that then relates to the outputs that they get and the quality of the outputs they receive.
I think the gamification point is obviously really crucial when you start to look at workforce enablement and the empowerment around how AI can be leveraged within a specific business. But before that, crucially, is the communication point of why. And I think that's often one of those pinch points that we see is the leaders within a business or the leaders of a specific pilot are not necessarily often communicating effectively what they're aiming to achieve, or communicating the barriers of how they can empower those employees and what the directive of those individuals who contribute to this pilot or the outcome that they're looking to achieve. And I think that's a really salient point that we need to focus on when you look at the adoption process as well, but specifically for leaders, right? Leaders have worked in those environments and have led businesses for many years, and they've been through change management programs around technology, sure, but this is very different because there's direct empowerment around a new technology. There's a lot of demystification that's coming with that technology that has not been seen before with technology changes such as, you know, like the cloud rush, the human factors of cybersecurity. They're actually quite binary compared to AI, where there's an open art of possibility that applies to everyone, not just the directive.
I completely agree. I think this is where this changes the game. I think for leadership is if you're deploying a new CRM system, or you're deploying new cybersecurity tooling, or you're changing the process procedures. It doesn't require a fundamental change in management and leadership. The use of AI does.
Absolutely.
You have to change the way in which you are working with your staff, how you're motivating the staff. You mentioned it just now in terms of empowering your staff. You know, leadership in an AI world is much more about enablement than traditional top-down management approach. And there's no other technology that I can think of that we've implemented that requires a fundamental shift in the way in which we lead organisations and manage staff.
It's driven by fear, isn't it, as well? As you know, you ask, you know, when we've conducted workforce surveys, workforce enablement programs, one of the opening gambits is, do you trust AI? And overwhelmingly, 80% typically, and put a percentage out of the air there, but the overwhelming majority don't. Of standard users, if you want to call them that, AI workers as we would align them, don't trust AI. They don't understand, and they don't trust the concept of AI, which is obviously a very broad thing in its own right. So that's the first hurdle that leaders need to understand, is that you may understand where your vision is and your board or your leadership team, but it's a real big challenge to ensure that those that are going to be utilising or are going to be fueling the success of your deployment do understand the elements which are needing to be demystified around the negative side of AI in order to adopt and empower, like we say, that workforce.
Effective transformation starts with knowing your starting point. You have to understand across your organisation what your starting point is. Absolutely. So, some of those boot camps that we do around AI. You blame the media, right? People think Skynet's coming to get them. But actually, one of the things I really enjoy is going through the basics of AI, how it works, how large language model works, how tokenization works. There's a sort of mechanical part of it. Because that, one, demystifies, two, it educates, and three, it really does stimulate conversation. People do find this technology and the way it works interesting.
Stephen, are you, when you're speaking firsthand with leaders in business, either of specific departments or at an executive level, are you seeing an approach that is communication first, or is that often overlooked in some of the engagements you see?
I think it's a little bit mixed, as is inevitably the case between different groups. Just to come back to a point you just mentioned about trust, because I just wanted to pick up on that a little bit. It's a useful thought. Trust is something that's built through experience, and could well go a bit deeper into that later. But if you think about it as a person's image of AI, and I'm not trying to condescend in any way, but if you've never met this stuff previously, the way a metaphor for it perhaps is like a jigsaw. You may have one or two pieces that have been put in for you, which could well have been the doomsayers who've said that this thing's going to take over the world, all of your jobs are going to be gone, and you might as well just retire now because there's not going to be any fun tomorrow, sort of thing.
Could, right?
Well, yeah, but retirement is going to be that short, it doesn't matter, so you can afford it. But if those are the only things that you've picked up, and at the same time as that, there isn't another voice, whether it's your organisation or otherwise, that says, actually, the way we're trying to use this in our organisation, we think there's an opportunity. Putting some other bits of that puzzle together. Some of it might be through gamification and having a go and learning stuff. Yeah. But this is kind of how humans understand anything at any time. It's a constant evolution of our understandings of something, built on all of the little nuances and conversations and things that we have. The three of us will leave this conversation today with a slightly different view, purely because we've had a conversation about it. So to your point about that in organisations, yeah, it is absolutely critical to say, take Keir Starmer's thing that, AI is going to do everything for everyone, it's going to revolutionise every department, and then told every department to put it on their agenda. Well, somehow we've got to translate that into, within some confines, this might mean X, Y, Z in our particular department. We think we're going to have some value in supply chain, so we're going to look at that. But keeping that conversation open and alive is challenging. I would say it's certainly challenging if you're the kind of leader who isn't necessarily very open or very comfortable with uncertainty, whether because your team are expecting you to just know the answer or your boss is or whatever. That's going to be quite awkward because nobody really knows right now. That's kind of a fairly true statement, I think, to say that the board doesn't know what they want you to do with AI other than do something and it's going to make us better, right? And so on. The teams probably want something because I can get rid of some of the dirge in my job or whatever, but none of us really know. So I'd come back to conversation. If you ignore it, people are going to put other bits of the puzzle in. That, not to say you want to control the narrative, but at least be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and set the structure for what's good and what's bad within that adoption process. The risks that can be opened up by not adequately setting the stall for how you want to use those tools, what the environment should look like in your business, and how those users should interact with those tools, and also flag when there are issues with quality of outputs, and to get really granular in certain use cases. And I think that's really, really, really.
I think it would be really fascinating. And I'm kind of yet to see this, but where groups of people that have used AI in a particular organisation in the way that they have, then move to another organisation. We see this with other tools anyway, just from everything from a basic sales process, as it were, or whatever. But if you're very much used to working in a certain way with AI in an organization, how bespoke that's going to make the person and that environment. I'm curious to see sort of that, what happens with that as the months roll on, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think your comment with regards to good and bad, Lloyd, I think certainly that applies to the required guardrails, policy and compliance and information security, data security. When it comes to staff experimentation, there is no good or bad. That's one of the key concepts, I think, in terms of allowing them to fail forward in terms of how your staff train and develop their AI capability.
And how do you see, or have you seen thought, probably a better way to at this stage, have you seen conversations with leaders around how the general structure of their organisation can change through artificial intelligence being adopted across their business?
Conversations mostly, in my experience so far.
And what does that look like? Flattening, widening? What does? Again,
it's
general.
I know. I appreciate it's a sort of general thing. The challenge with flattening altogether, I mean, it's one thing if you've got 20 people in your company. If you've got 20,000 or 200,000, it's a very different conversation. You rely on everybody having a pretty good central understanding and the capabilities to be autonomous with that sort of level of uncertainty for themselves. So if you just say to a group of 20 people, right, do what you like, we've still got to be able to set some sort of boundary around it. Might be as simple as, please don't use a public generative AI to do anything with our data, thanks, because we don't want that out there. It's got to be the one that we've paid for. It's got to be the one that we've built internally, whatever it is. But that sort of stuff, I think, is particularly solid. The conversations, though, are more about removal of perhaps some kind of clerical activity in organisations, which then may give you an opportunity to move your human capability to different parts of your organisation. If you can free up a significant amount of time in this area, say credit control, for example, being able to manage outbound credit control and handle that means that you might be able to save some time in your organisation to use things or use that capability elsewhere.
It's definitely one of the drivers around, if we look at the entry level for AI usage with most businesses is productivity tools.
Yes.
And the key message we discuss with businesses is, it's freeing up time for the individuals in those roles to drive the value task, the creativity that's key to their role and their experience. And that has a very basic strap line benefit. Really does ring true, but it's what then the business does with that time. It's how they structure their business operations to really lean into that benefit, I feel is quite important.
Coming from the point of AI and these capabilities are something of a force multiplier, right? They aren't this is something that can theoretically make parts of your organisation more capable, more effective in whatever way that may be than they are today. Perhaps back to a point that you made at the start, there's a question, of course, about what problem are we really trying to solve. So the goal of AI is not necessarily to reorganise our company. The goal of AI isn't to lay people off because we don't have to have that person anymore. The goal of our organisation, or rather this is a tool that we might use to achieve what we might want to do in our company, which could be better service our customer. We may even wish to make it a better environment for the people that work there so that we better serve our customer. Of course, our shareholders, perhaps, if we're driven in that way in our organisation, we want to service them. So AI is the tool in the middle of that. Given that dependency, or rather that's a dependency to any then organisational change you might want to make. So in our particular company, X, we may have a very administratively heavy component of our organisation that for sure we can reduce some of that need in there, but we may invest over here because we can do something creatively or differently now that we didn't ever have the capability to do before in our organisation, like using AI as effectively another member of the team rather than as a replacement. You bring them in as additive to improve or to provide a different perspective into the work that the team are doing.
Using AI or looking at AI as another team member reminds me of Tom Lütke and his announcement, the CEO of Shopify, where he said that if you want to employ a new member of staff, you have to first prove that AI can't do the job. And there's your AI employee. And furthermore, that the performance reviews of all employees within that organisation will include AI proficiency. So again, AI is a fundamental, either as a colleague, treat it as a colleague, or ensuring that those skills are baked in. I'm not saying all organisations are following that path, but certainly we're heading in that direction.
We are, and I will come back to that. What's the problem question again of an organisation? So an organisation 10 years ago, 20 years ago had a level of complexity in the work that it did. I'm a great advocate for saying that not everything is complex. There are lots of things in organisations that aren't, and there are better ways of handling that stuff. Bringing AI capability in has got the potential to make what you're doing more complex. And I find that I say that statement slightly unqualified because it's more of a hunch than it is anything else. To say, well, let's imagine that Scrum team that's got their, as I said, a friend of mine has got an AI product which effectively acts as an extra member in the Scrum team to provide a bit of encyclopedic knowledge of what's happened before, what might be happening again, and therefore hopefully avoid mistakes and get their estimates better and so on. But we've now created a team that we've got no familiarity with. We've got something different happening in our organisation that we haven't quite seen before. So I suppose it comes back to a lot of what I said at the start. We're learning a lot. We need these experiments to see whether or not they truly get us to where we want to be. But if we haven't defined the problem, we've now got AI in our organisation. We're not really sure what we were trying to do with it or that particular capability. And it's going to be very difficult then to say whether or not we've achieved anything other than installing some technology. And we can do better than that for sure.
I think in terms of understanding how teams work and how teams understand the use of AI and experiment with AI in the way that you've just described, embedding that in your teams is fundamental because, of course, AI is not a static thing. It's moving at a pace of knots faster than we are. So those teams have to adapt and have to adopt those technologies and understand how to get the most of those technologies, not in a static way, but in a continuous way, because AI is running away from us, many of us, in terms of its capability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know another use, which we haven't particularly talked about, but again, to how teams might operate, there's a lot in the press. One of those jigsaw pieces, at least, will be bias and discrimination that people have got when it comes to AI and the data that's been drawn into them. And we may get into that later, but you could also use these capabilities to help promote things like fairness in teams too, because being able to get effectively an objective view, as long as you've prompted or created the model in the right way, but to be able to get an objective view of stuff actually could help you to promote those kind of benefits in an organisation or those kind of values in an organisation that you couldn't do previously. Again, that comes back to someone wanting to do that and therefore using and experimenting with a tool like this to see how it can benefit you.
And you're reliant on then the underlying grounding of that model to be void of bias also, which is probably another topic for another day. Stephen, before we rolled, we were talking about our love for a certain 90s TV show, The Crystal Maze. I think you missed that one, Jim. We'll discuss that later. To wrap up this topic, I think I'll ask you a question aligned to another 90s television personality, Mystic Meg. So doing your best Mystic Meg impression, how do you foresee businesses and organisations looking in 10 years' time off the back of the AI wave we face?
Well, okay. I'm not sure I'm sparkly enough for the full Mystic Meg, but I'll try my best at a Barnum statement, I suppose. So it'll be true and untrue all at the same time. I guess from what I've seen, I'm expecting a lot of organisations to continue to bring AI capabilities into their midst. I suppose experience tells me that many of those won't be that materially different. Or at least back to what is the problem. They didn't ever find a real problem that AI was going to do something about in their organisation. But what we are already beginning to see, and I think what we will see crescendo, continue to in 10 years' time, are companies that have discovered a way of using AI for something that directly talks to their top line, as it were. So product uses and capabilities of this stuff, things that we haven't been able to do before. The shape of organizations in those cases is then going to be dominated by those that were able to harness and understand and maybe even get lucky with some experiments. But I guess, as it's always the case with technological advance, there are definitely going to be winners and losers. This is, as I say, a full-on Barnum statement. What's your view, Lloyd?
Well, I'll throw it right back at me there.
Well, why not?
We'll get Jim involved in a minute as well. No, I think I do agree. I do agree with how you phrased that. I do think there'll be elements of organisational structural change that will come on sooner rather than later. But I think there will be also, I think the use cases that will be pushed generically across businesses around productivity, around process efficiency. I do think will. Not necessarily the age of the 10,000 employee business is gone, but I do think there will be less and less larger businesses. I think it is a general sweeping statement. I do think if you look at the efficiencies that a 20-person business can generate, would be akin to what say 10 years ago from today, a 150, 200-person business could generate in terms of how they engage in their market, in their environment. So I do think generally the shift will be business sizes will shrink. There'll be more startups, I believe, more and more. I do think, I think we speak from our experience and how we've leveraged AI tooling even at a basic level to help us with the efficiencies of starting our business, eating our own dog food, is testament to how those tools can be used to scale quickly, to drive those efficiencies, which means your business can be more streamlined, which means you can do more with less. And I do think that will be a systemic change around the size of organisations we see in general.
Well, I like to think about the human factor of that question. Certainly, I like the winners and losers. Absolutely, AI it creates a competitive environment, and those that are not using it, they're potentially going to be the losers. But us as a staff, if we think about what AI promises to remove the repetitive, the task, the mundane, and what it promises to free us up to be creative, to be exploratory. So I think in terms of the human factor, for those of us that still have jobs, I'm joking, for those of us that are, one, AI literate, and two, organisations are embracing AI, I do think that's going to mean that work for us is a much happier, much more interesting, much more dynamic place, rather than for many being a very task-orientated, mundane, repetitive place to be.
Just one last thought on that, and thinking about my own teenager in a way, and trying to extol the importance of boredom on him. That he doesn't have to be, it's okay to be bored, and actually it's brilliant, because in there is the time when you catch up on what you think about the world. This is where you're building your jigsaw and understanding what's going on around you, right? And if you never do that because there's another short that you can watch or there's another thing you can do, you never get there. And I slightly wonder whether or not in 10 years' time we'll notice that of if you really take away all of the low-level task that a person does, and the corollary of saying by expectation, therefore you'll be creative instead, I wonder whether or not you ever can be that person, or whether or not actually you need some of that drudge and some of that just to give you the time to feel and experience what's going on in the organisation to come up with that answer. If all of that stuff disappears, what do we end up with as a role?
Superhumans, surely.
Oh, of course. Yeah, exactly. Where we can do everything to secure growth, raise living standards, and transform our public services. Right? We can do it all.
Back to Keir Starmer.
So moving on to our second topic today. So we're talking about how leadership must adapt moving forward, which I think we've set up really nicely with that first section. So Stephen, how do you see AI shifting the core responsibilities of leaders and the traits that they must develop in order to be effective in an AI world?
Sure. So we touched a couple of these things, but it's definitely worth going deeper. There's probably all of what I'm going to say anyway is couched in it depends a bit about how you're bringing AI into your organisation, what aspects you're using, and so on. So that I suppose the headline stuff will be what people may attribute to being management activities may theoretically reduce. So the amount of spreadsheet time you have, for example. Yeah. We already know that it's very easy to take a load of raw data, for example, chuck it into any one of these models, and you can get back some graphs and a bit of immediate analysis, which you've got your junior analyst sat next to you. You can do that stuff in minutes rather than hours. So those sort of things are going to reduce, or potentially can reduce. I'll caveat that a little bit. And that creates the space, but I think in line with the conversation we had about trust and getting people sort of to start using these tools, we should use that time for more sort of gut stuff. So actually talking to people in our organisation, helping to hear, to listen, to make sense of what's going on around. So maybe to be more facilitative, for example. So you've got your teams, your clients, and otherwise you've got very much a role, I would suggest, if you're heavily investing in AI capabilities, to help people around that have a good conversation. Just an illustrative point. I was talking to someone the other day who was absolutely delighted and excited because he doesn't ever have to write up the notes after a meeting anymore, because he can use one of the tools plugged into Zoom or whatever, and therefore he's got everything. He doesn't have to think about it. And I challenged him on it to say, well, actually, but none of that really mattered anyway. Often the notes that you get out of the back of a meeting, very few people would have looked at, particularly. The value of the value of the conversation is, well, that's where the value is. It was the people talking to each other and understanding what would happen next. The notes are often there just to remind people to do their tasks, and maybe that's okay. But the bit that we should be focusing on really is the conversation in the first place, I think, as much as possible. Also linking back to earlier, I think that point about convincing people of the benefits, maybe that's not the right phrase, helping people to understand the intention. Yeah. Playing a bit of a straight bat, to use a sort of cricketing term, to say this thing isn't here to change. It could potentially change everything, but we're going to talk to you constantly about what we think might happen, and you need your organisation and the people within it sensing what's happening. So if decisions are coming back to you about where to deploy and where to invest your money and how to change your organisation, you've got as much of those stories and those experiences as possible to be able to kind of make better decisions. So it's theoretically we can amplify that sort of ambassadorial role of a leader, if you like, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a leader with title, but we need those sort of ambassadors in an organisation, I think, to help. I keep using the jigsaw analogy, but maybe that's useful. But you want people to have almost as much as possible a similar image of what it is that's going on as you can, rather than lots of people working on their own puzzles and trying to complete them for themselves. Is trying to engage enough communication in the organisation to build that central, a better general view about what's happening.
I think there's three really interesting points there that I'd like to respond to. First and foremost, the last point about working in silos. Absolutely right. AI doesn't work in silos. AI doesn't respect organisational boundaries and data boundaries. And in order to get the best value out of AI, the best outcomes out of AI, you have to do it as a team. You can't do it as an individual. The last thing you should be doing is giving AI to your IT team or giving it to your data analysts. Actually, you should be putting a team together across your organisation, and that's where you're going to see value. I think in terms of the leadership change, I agree 100% in terms of how leaders have to change. It's almost going from a decision maker to sense maker. We know that in an AI-led world, certainly if we talk about productivity and ideation and use cases, what's different about AI is that generally comes from your frontline workers. They understand the process and procedures within your organisation. They're best placed to understand how you can build efficiencies into your organisation. No longer perhaps is it the executive that then dictates what your staff will do. Actually, that information flow goes the other way. So being the custodian, the human in the loop, as we like to put it in the way that you've described, is absolutely 100% correct. And the last point, I think, in terms of again, the human in the loop and the emotion and the interpretation and the use of experience. I think that's right. I think that's fundamentally important, either in terms of the generic use of AI or in the automation of processes. The human in the loop is absolutely fundamental. But AI, we augment ourselves. So even if it is around sentiment analysis, even if it is around interpretation, AI still has a role. If your analogy in a meeting, if I join a meeting late, I can ask, well, what did I miss? It's very straightforward. But also, what's the sentiment of the meeting? What's the tone?
You're never late, Jim.
I'm never late. What's the tone of the meeting? Is it a positive meeting? Yeah. Have they raised objections? So I think we can also augment ourselves as humans in terms of some of those more touchy-feely elements that we rely on as humans. Again, it's about augmentation, isn't it? What do you think about that, Stephen?
I'm really curious about that, because at the moment, I haven't been in a meeting at the moment where an AI is looking at body language, for example, as it, yet
right.
linked up to a video camera to actually see. Because when you talk about sentiment in the room, that's such a complicated thing. We've evolved over 50,000 years to notice change in other people and respond and act and operate in the way that we do. And getting a text sort of based sentiment analysis by the use of language in a room. I mean, it could be that you just take, it could be that you've got someone particularly gruff in the meeting who had a bad night, the cat's gone missing or whatever it is.
Somebody's hungover.
And that's come through in the conversation rather than it being a genuine emotion that you're trying to capture. Yeah. So I think that's really curious. That point about being able to catch up on stuff, that's phenomenal. And from an educational point of view, a new starter coming into a team, what a wonderful resource to be able to, not only has it got access to everything that's everything you've plugged into it, but everything that's theoretically happened before, but understanding where you are, that's a wonderful place to get started. One thing you said just triggered, it was something I was going to mention, as a sentiment from Gary Klein, who is a kind of a thinker in the sense-making space, but particularly around decision-making. And he challenged, maybe this echoes back to the point I was making about not much might change in 10 years, is we've still got some fairly embedded ideas about how, for example, decisions get made in organisations or they get made in general. And two of them are that decisions are made better with data, and then the second one is more data makes better decisions, as sort of an extension of the same thing. Our experience so far is pretty much that that's not the case. There are so many examples where decisions are not actually made by data. Maybe data is involved. Someone will see data, but the decision that they actually make is not just based on that thing in front of them. It's made from their 25 years of experience over here. It's because of that conversation they had, or because they're hungover. It could be any of those things that come into the decision that gets made. And there are plenty of disaster movies that are based on someone effectively seeing the data and then saying, no, I'm going to do my own thing, and then saving all the people. AI in that respect gives us all a huge amount of encyclopedic data, but as Klein said, and I think this is definitely something that we will need to respect, is that the experts in your organisation should be treated as detectors rather than encyclopedias. So if AI is replacing the encyclopedic bit by giving all of us access to an immense amount of knowledge, our brilliance, the human brilliance, at least right now in the chapters of AI, is the detector bit. With that data and all of these other cues I've got, I can see something where we should take action and where we should move. And so, again, leaders in that case, I think they've got a key role in this, and treating the stories and the experiences from their teams as more data rather than just the touchy-feely bit, I think you said. Sorry, I don't mean to attack you on that at all. You can probably cut that bit out. But that idea of it being all of those are bits of sensory data, whether it's stuff from AI or a conversation that we can use.
And then bring it back to specifically to leaders in that role. Do you think then it's the key trait is then identifying who the sense makers are in their organisation, empowering those sense makers and putting them in a position to, control or be the lead augmenter of technology within those departments, those roles, those processes?
So it would make sense to have some people that are charged with facilitating some of that conversation. Yeah, that sounds like a very sensible thing to do. Leaders, in my experience, aren't taught much about how to do this. Sense making is a very human thing. We've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. This conversation is the three of us improving our sense of what's going on.
That's a very different type of delegation, though, for a leader, isn't it? The binary, delegating a task, delegating an ownership of that sense making, as we've labelled it.
Yeah, it is, but maybe it's more. This is about intelligence, I guess, or wisdom, in probably a better word, in your organisation, and getting whether or not you facilitate those sessions yourself, or whether or not you, through lots of other people, facilitate sessions. It's a way of gathering intelligence across the landscape of your organisation, and that's everything from your customer to your supplier to everyone. You've got a chance to do that. You don't sail a ship across the ocean without continually mapping where you are, and that's entirely what we should be doing. If there really are more moving parts because of this, if we have introduced more complexity into our organisation, that focus on conversation is going to be essential. Stuff will still go wrong. We're still going to discover some disaster somewhere, or some data is going to get moved into the wrong. That's going to happen. But rather than just pretend it's not going to and try and legislate, I would argue it's better to have that. It may be a different approach, but have your organisation helping to sense with you.
Absolutely. Well, and we look at the rate of change and how the technology is evolving and growing in terms of the outcomes and use cases that are more accessible to businesses generally. Your analogy there around the sailing piece is spot on, but it's the leaders who take that view and understand that this is not we're implementing a change across our organisation, we're empowering our staff, and we're changing how we lead this organisation in the AI world. Right, we've done that. No, it's a continual change management process. It's a continual leadership shift in understanding that there's a dynamic world that's going to impact your staff, and you have to lead those individuals in a different way to constantly evolve, to constantly empower them in new ways. And that's a real different dynamic than, in my opinion, please, if you think contrary, please do say, but to where we have a set dynamic of a leader leading roles, leading departments, and leading sort of set established criteria of what an individual is doing within an organisation. I think the fluidity of that is shifting quite significantly when you look at those businesses that are adopting AI prevalently and are taking that continuous improvement approach to their adoption roadmap.
Yeah, the reality is that there is no, with anomalies of course, but there's no sort of organisation where the leader already knows what they've got to do when it comes to AI.
Absolutely.
We're certainly not in an artisan style thing here.
It's
where
quite the contrary, actually.
Exactly. We all know nothing.
Yeah.
So if we all know nothing, that's a wonderful opportunity, isn't it? That we can then maybe learn about stuff together. But we've got to have habits in organisations where leaders, especially middle management, for example, stuck in that place where your boss expects you to know what you're doing and know what you're talking about, and your team expect you maybe to know what you're doing and you're talking about, and you're stuck in the middle of that. It's a really difficult thing to do, to then maybe say, actually, we don't really know very much. But maybe that's not the right language to use when you're having your conversation about your targets for this year, to say, well, nobody knows anything, so I'm going to have a go.
Identifying where that line of we know nothing is. I think
right,
that's
but being
really
able to
key
say
element.
there is such a breadth of possibility, we've got to put on our kind of our experimentation boots right now, and that's going to mean all of us having more kind of grown-up conversations with each other, rather than assuming that we can just task people to perhaps do things.
Yeah.
Maybe out of that will be something that affects work in 10 years' time. Maybe because in one of those conversations we try something. But you're absolutely right, that if there is a hierarchical, I suppose that's what we're talking about really, but that sort of very constrained way of making decisions in an organisation, maybe there are opportunities to be missed right now. It's maybe less likely that someone will upload some of their data to something they shouldn't, because we've been very strong on regulation, maybe. But I think probably aren't going to harness the opportunities either.
Also, maybe we'll use "We all know nothing" as the tagline for this thought leadership podcast today.
I like that.
We probably won't lead with that one, I don't think. But no, I think it's absolutely spot on. Jim, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think that we talk about these leadership styles and management styles as a sort of switch on, switch off. Of course, the reality is far from. We talk about organisational change and putting together exploratory development teams around AI. And we tend to think about the frontline workers and the data analysts, and but actually management, of course, included in that, because management have to be afforded the opportunity to learn how to manage in a way that's not dictatorial, that's exploratory, that celebrates failure as much as success. That's a fundamental shift, and they've got to do that whilst running a company in a more traditional way as well. So it's a gradual, incremental, both for staff and management, in terms of running proof of concepts, having those bespoke teams to develop those AI capabilities, and then absorbing that back into the organisation, and then going again, and then iteratively over time, you start to change the leadership style as you deploy more and more AI tools within that organisation. I just wanted to draw the line that it's not an on or off thing.
No, absolutely.
It takes time,
Yeah.
and particularly if we're changing leadership and management styles, that does take even a long time, because that's a fundamental shift in the culture of that organisation.
I think that within that lies a big challenge, though, because the rate of change of the capabilities of the technology, and generally, we speak in a general term, it's moving so rapidly that making those adjustments of how you lead and how you develop and how you drive that change effectively and look after your employees and your workforce and your culture as a business, you're constantly fighting that battle of, well, what we can do is changed, but we've only just adjusted to what we've implemented. So if especially in industries where there is a clear competitive advantage from leveraging AI prominently, which is candidly most now, that's a real challenge. When you try and strategize, you try and build that roadmap for an organization. So it's a real challenge to say, actually, the technology is moving faster than we can. So how do we try and keep up? How do we shift what we're doing? When do we, we've hit a success criteria for section A of our roadmap, but actually, completely changed the horizon of what we can achieve. So we need to completely restart. I mean, it's a dynamic like we alluded to earlier. It's a dynamic we've not seen it before in technology. The cloud roadmap was very binary. You knew what was coming. You knew what the natural progression was of the technology and what was available to you. With AI, it's completely different, as we alluded to, and that shift of how you strategize and how you lead is seismic, I feel.
Yeah, I think.
Did I stun you both into
No.
silence?
No.
Well, it's really profound or not profound at all?
It's thought-provoking, isn't it? An interesting point I think that's what you both alluded to as well is, as an AI-led organisation, or ambitions to be an AI-led organisation, we are going to want to attract the AI talent into an organisation.
Yeah.
If the organisation doesn't have those leadership styles, they're going to find it very, very difficult to attract and hold on to AI talent. And there's a fundamental shift, isn't there, in perhaps the skills that we look for when we're recruiting in an AI world. Maybe we don't hire the person that's got the skills and experience to do a specific task. Maybe we hire somebody that is proficient in AI, that can use AI to achieve those tasks in a faster, more efficient way. And then we can deploy those skill sets across multiple domains within that organisation. So again, there's a fundamental shift in how we attract, how we retain, and then how we think about talent and skill sets within our organisation, and the management and leadership structures that are required in order to make that effective.
I completely agree. Maybe that chimes a little bit to the we know nothing thing again, because we're still sort of experiencing it. As maybe a throwaway bit of positivity is, with any of this stuff, if you make any change in your organisation, whether it's to be how the ways of working or anything like that, and you get whatever result there is, there's no way of knowing if you would have got a different result if you did something else, because time has moved on and everything's changed.
Back to Mystic Meg and her crystal ball, right?
I think you made the point around OKRs, didn't you? Around the Google approach to OKRs. I remember at your last talk that we saw that was that similar. Well, if we didn't implement OKRs, would we have improved even more?
Exactly, you can't possibly know. I mean, there's a couple of dimensions as a leader that I talk about, I suppose, where you've got influence on the results that an organisation or a team produce, and you've got an influence about how much fun it is around here and how engaging it is. I appreciate that's heavily summarised, but whatever it is you do, you've got no way of seeing or no way of knowing whether or not, had you done something different, you would have got a better or a worse result. I mean, of course, poetic license, there will be some things that are going to be pretty obvious, I suppose. Just more seriously, though, to pick up on that point about leadership and culture, because you mentioned that in there, organisations may have a sort of meta sort of culture around them, and you say, this kind of an organisation is this thing, but in reality, there is within an organisation there are pockets of culture. So this particular group operate in this kind of way, and this group operate in that way, and so on. It's a more complex picture again about how things are going to get done and get organised. So you're absolutely right when it comes to talent. That's another question to keep open and think about. Is given the problems that we're trying to solve or the opportunities we're trying to get of reach with the people that we've got and the territory constraints that we're in and so on, we've maybe got some ideas and some guesses about how some of these capabilities will help us, and therefore we're back to that experimentation thing again of saying, maybe we can use those bits of data to try this in this part of our organisation because we think it's likely to be already more prepared, more ready, more tech ready, as it were, to be able to do something with this rather than just sort of lifting the lid and saying, right, because this doesn't work. Everybody's empowered tomorrow. Well, okay, but actually there were lots of people involved in getting stuff done previously, and suddenly they aren't there, and we're assuming that those skills are just innately in everyone else, are we? Because they're not, and it's not going to just work overnight. Exactly as you say, it takes real time to affect that kind of change in an organisation.
Absolutely. And you mentioned experimentation there. How do you feel leaders should balance, and you touched a bit on it there, promoting experimentation with also balancing that with maintaining trust and accountability?
So it follows on really nicely, doesn't it? Because we've got to have some sort of framing to experiment in. Like the thing about flattening the organisation tomorrow and assuming that everybody can just work without a boss. We know that doesn't work. We've seen, even Google tried that. It can work if those people have got an appropriate level of skill, i.e. skill, knowledge, whatever. And that's sort of the point. In order for someone to experiment and really try and harness some opportunities and really innovate and find things, they've got to understand a little bit about what the rules of the game are and be trusted with those. You can't play chess without a board is a sort of common thing that I say, and a leader's thing here might be to help people understand what that board is. There are lines of regulation that we won't cross. It might be simple rules to start with. Personnel data of any kind does not go into any of this stuff. We're going to be very careful with certain walls. I mentioned earlier, nothing goes into a public LLM, for example. Please don't use that for anything ever. But rather than that just being an instruction, that should be a conversation as we're discovering, and we're moving ourselves up from knowing nothing to knowing a little bit. Just a general, we want more stuff like this in our organisation where someone's within the known boundaries has experimented very well, and we want less reckless stuff and maybe less no action at all as well. Show people what that image might look like.
That no action is a theme that's come up. The OKR comment about knowing whether doing it is the right thing or not. Certainly, in those situations, doing nothing is the wrong answer. It's the same in most of the time. It's the same with AI. You pick a route, experiment. If you fail, that's a success as well, right? Because you learn from it.
Totally, that's another bit of the jigsaw. To continue to use that metaphor, you're continuing to develop your success. I would say, just in the small defence of OKRs for a second, because I do spend quite a bit of time bashing them, but the bit that's valued, like that meeting, the bit that's valuable is they give you a frame to have a good conversation on top of. That's the value.
Yes.
It didn't need to be OKRs, but that conversation was the bit. That's where the value turned up.
I think with regards to governance and compliance, I think it's something you touched on there. Rather than it being dictatorial, top-led, I think make it ubiquitous in as much that all of your staff should be involved. Because, again, they understand the data, the process, the procedures, potentially some of the risks. So when we're setting guidelines and we're mapping out guidelines, including your staff in that decision-making then ensures that your staff doesn't feel that it's top-down dictatorial. I think that's a fundamental shift in the way that we work with our staff as leaders. And secondly, we talk about governance and compliance and policies, and you must not, or we must not. But there are very, very good controls within. I'll use Microsoft ecosystem as an example. Very, very good controls and capabilities to enforce those governance and policies in a really transparent way. And that's not just talking about your Copilot environment. I mean, if we're talking about AI, those tools are there that can make sure that you do have a safe environment within which you can experiment. They can control the information that you put into online, Chat GPT and Meta and all the other tools. So I think there are two sides to governance and compliance. One is the theoretical and regulatory and policy driven. But I think then in terms of the tools that we have available to us today, our ability to enforce those controls, and again, force is a heavy-handed word, but our ability to implement those controls, to create a safe environment, is really, really strong. Those tools are very, very capable.
Yeah, I agree, and we see this firsthand, right? We work with businesses specifically around their AI policy. It's exactly like you've said there. It's a conversation, and as Jim alluded to, it has to be, there has to be inputs around understanding your workforce to design what that policy should look like. An AI policy is not just a cookie cutter policy that you then dictatorially push across the organisation. It should be unique to your uses, your use case, the data that you work with, but also the propensity, the understanding, the level of trust within your workforce to leverage those tools, because that policy should clearly outline to the members of staff, give them the protection of how they use those tools, the protection of where they shouldn't use those tools, but also define the business's intentions generally of how they're going to adopt AI. And that's a really powerful thing, and we spoke about this before we recorded around that diminishing trust around AI. AI is going to take my job. If you set out a clear policy as a leader that articulates the intentions of your organisation of how you're using AI, you are accountable to that, which is great as a leader to be accountable against that policy. But also you really disarm the notion of AI taking an individual's job, and you start to truly empower. And that being part of that policy is really important, is a really important factor. I think when we carry out the workforce surveys with our clients before we engage around that policy and strategy creation, and the insights you get from a across the board survey with that organisation from the workforce often contradicts what the understanding of the leadership team is of the workforce. So it really does bridge that gap, and then you get an effective strategy, an effective policy that is not only saying where we're going to go, but also it's giving your employees that's protection and understanding and warm fuzzy feeling that this is not something that's against them, it's something that they can leverage.
Actually, it should be 100% should be inclusive, and you mentioned those guardrails, and if we look at Microsoft's 6 principles of accountability, fairness, reliability, privacy, inclusivity, transparency, and accountability within the tool set. So they build those guardrails in. And they're really good guardrails that we might also adopt in terms of our use of, right? In terms of the way that we deploy and use those technologies within our organisations or within our applications, our processes and procedures.
It's just worth, I think, just noting or talking to that a lot of the challenges when you see in the media and we talk about bias and discrimination and so on, we've certainly got some good controls around the technologies and so on, but a lot of the data that has fed certainly these public models is full of information which is in itself biased and discriminatory, supplied to us by a large language model that's broadly out to try and please us and give us an answer that it thinks is appropriate. This is if you try and generate an image of a kitten, for example, I haven't yet been able to generate a picture of a Sphinx cat, for example. One of those the hairless ones that aren't necessarily attractive to everybody. But of course, that's not what AI thinks you're going to want to see. You just get these cute little kind of. Some of them are literally in Easter baskets and things because it's all about that image that it's trying to persuade. So just going back to that point that I mentioned about Klein, talking about people being detectors rather than encyclopedias. To be a detector, you've got to have some knowledge and you've got to have some experience. So to that thing about compliance of saying, okay, these are the sort of things that we're watching out for, and educating and supporting your team's experience and understand what the guardrails are, I think that's valuable invested time. I mean, get them to do the kitten experiment and they'll quickly kind of go, oh, bloody, there's some stuff in here that I'm a bit...
Yes.
Maybe the answers I'm getting, I need to just second guess sometimes or think about.
I think that's a really important lesson to learn because any of us that have used any generative AI tools, we know, understand, and experience hallucination. Right, the aim of the AI, the AI monster, to please us and to tell us whatever we want to hear. And certainly in my experience, when a model starts to go down that road, it finds it very, very difficult to get out of it, doesn't it? Have you seen that where a generative AI tool goes down its old hallucinogenic rabbit hole? So absolutely, it's being able to spot and correct that.
And I think that, I mean, it's the stuff I talk about, so inevitably it's going to come through in what I talk about. It's part of my own jigsaw puzzle. But that thing of saying if you can get at least a group of people, to your point about not necessarily leaders wanting to do it with everybody, but create that sort of sensing network where you are having useful conversations and taking those stories and those experiences as data that can then form your opinion and then keep that machine, sort of somewhat other use of the word machine, in your organisation moving so that you can adapt your policy and understand where you need to put your time and energy.
Yeah.
Okay, final topic for today. Thank you for your time.
No, great pleasure. Great pleasure.
So, practical advice for leaders in an AI world. So, Jim, what practical first steps would you advise leaders on taking that support AI adoption and human adaptability?
Start with purpose, not with tools.
We'll just wrap there, shall we?
Well, look, I mean, I think we've touched on this.
Yeah.
We see failed AI adoption projects because it's a product led or it's a tool based or it's an IT function, right?
Yeah.
That's not how you adopt AI effectively. Aligning to your business use case, defining your outcomes is absolutely how you permanently embed AI into your organisation. So start with purpose, start with outcomes, objectives, strategic alignment, not just look at the tooling.
Stephen?
Just building on that, I think, and to the theme of we know nothing in this conversation, I think one of those objectives could fairly be we don't know yet, or we don't know what the outcome is. There's a challenge, isn't there? Often when you talk about innovation, if you want to innovate with something, there's an implication sometimes in conversation that we already know the thing that we're trying to get. But we don't. The microwave came because the guy had the chocolate bar melt when he was working on the radar. All that sort of stuff. Those, I can't remember his name, excuse me. But that innovation like that sort of creative spark comes often from the left field. So we can set objectives and targets and so on. But an outcome right now might just more practically be learn something.
Yes.
As an organisation, we're not worried about saving money. We're not worried about whatever it might be now. We just want to understand how this stuff might be useful and go and discover what we can. The point you made earlier about failing, I think is true. You fail forward with that and therefore learn something and go. The only other thing I think I would add to the question was just that idea of if you can create that, build that sense-making muscle, that capability within yourself and around you to understand and listen to the conversations and stories and realities of what's happening so that you can respond and take action, then I think that's the thing. Certainly don't set objectives for 3 years and then sit back and see what happens.
No, it's a path to success, a failure rather, isn't it?
That's not going to get you where you want to be.
No.
And then from your engagement with businesses recently and previously, which Which behaviours, specifically in leaders, do you see building that confidence within the workforce?
Broadly, it comes down to openness, I think, as a trait, and straight back again, helping people to understand what it is that where we're trying to go, and being a bit open about we don't quite know where these things are going to get to. You've just got to be slightly careful with that. The concept we haven't particularly talked about on here, but there's a concept of cognitive closure, which is broadly how comfortable different people are with uncertainty. So some people want more cognitive closure, and others are much more comfortable with as little as you can give. In any given team, and especially across an organisation, of course, you're going to have every possible colour of that. Some people will just want to know what I've got to do today and tomorrow, and I just want that locked down. Leaders already will have an intuitive sense of who those people might be, and therefore can adapt a bit and be suitably open, I think is probably a better way of describing it with different people that they're talking to. Because what you certainly don't want to do is create a riot and scare everybody by saying, we don't know what this is going to do in our organisation, but it might be fun and some teams might change. Clearly that's not going to be the place to start.
Well, and I think in terms of building confidence, 100% lead by example. You're a leader, therefore show the behaviours that you want your staff to adopt. Be exploratory, be experimental, share and collaborate your failures as much as your successes. I think that's really going to help put your staff at ease and move away from the more traditional task-driven, failure-adverse way in which we're all used to working. I also think, again, you're always looking at the human impact. Make it human. Understand the impact that AI is having on individuals and their roles and their tasks and their well-being, not just about what it does for the organisation. That's a fundamental part of AI adoption, how it affects us as individuals. Again, it's this human squishy thing that I keep banging on about.
But I think that's where the organisations will trip up, is if you ignore that sort of advice and don't think about it. For most people working in a team, the distance between them and someone making meaningful decisions about their career is huge.
Yes.
So that's not, as a species, kind of how we're built. We're take us back to sort of small communities. We can see the person that's in charge, and we can make judgments about whether they seem to know what they're doing and they're treating us fairly and so on. Yeah. And we can do something about it if we can't. Now, the organisation is designed so that you can't see those people.
Yeah, you can't club the chief executive with a dinosaur bone.
Exactly. I don't like what you're thinking. I think I do better. My turn. You can't. No, exactly. You can't do that. But I think that's a lesson for the leaders here. It's again that thing about creating opportunities to talk.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing what magic happens. I guarantee that teams will have different perspectives, different jigsaw puzzles for what's going on, and unless they talk to each other, you'll never know that.
Yeah.
So, slightly different question to wrap us up, a bit of a curveball. Stephen, what's one outdated leadership cliche that you'd love AI to erase forever?
I think one that I think it will erase is that there's no I in team, because there's now an AI.
Nice.
Oh,
I like that.
That's very good.
I think that we're kind of there.
Jim?
Fake it till you make it. You can't fake it. You've got to be open, collaborative. You can't obscure the whole principle of AI success is try and fail, succeed, learn from the experience. There's no faking it. That doesn't move the conversation forward. So that doesn't work, I think. Fake it till you make it. It never worked anyway, but fake it till you make it in an AI world, I think, is fundamentally opposed to the principles of effective AI adoption.
So, what about you, Lloyd?
Mine's more of an organisational cliche. The 5-day working week. I think. Don't worry. We'll still be working probably 7 days. So I do feel that the AI will drive those efficiencies, and I do think that there should be more propensity for leaders to look at how workforce satisfaction and society can benefit from shorter working weeks and still maintain the operational efficiencies that businesses require, the outputs they require. You know, the trickle-down effect of that on society, economy, and there's been studies on it over the last, 10 plus years around effective 4-day working weeks across different countries, and they are overwhelmingly positive. I do think the implementation of AI within industries can really drive that forward and actually has a long-standing impact on society across a number of factors. I think that's a really positive, and it's taking every organisation's input into society into account, as well as how they can drive efficiencies through AI. That's a really positive thing that we've seen talked about.
That's great. So when are we moving to a 4-day week, Lloyd?
Whenever you want. we do what we want. Yeah.
Great.
Cool. And then just another wrap-up question then. So from a personal perspective, you can share as much as you like with this one. What's an everyday task that you would like AI to automate in your life?
Oh, wow. I think it would probably be something fairly mundane, I think. Managing appointments with medical professionals. I think that would be good. When you're given the sort of chase around trying to get something, you speak to this person, no, you've got to talk to that person, you can't talk, and so on. Handling that sort of stuff, I would very happily not have to do any of that ever again. So,
and being able to get an appointment as well would be...
that sort of precedes the problem,
yeah.
doesn't it? Actually, to be able to get an appointment. Yeah, that's probably a greater thing.
Excellent.
But yeah, taking that pain away. To go through all of that and then not get an appointment is even more insulting. So at least someone could do, an AI agent could do that for me.
Excellent.
I suppose.
Cool. Stephen, thank you for your time.
No, not at all. A great
Thanks, Steve.
pleasure, Lloyd. Jim, brilliant.
Jim,
Thank you.
Thank you.